Hello, my name is Jean Steveson, and I'm here today with Matt Luther, and we're going to talk with you a little bit about how to connect students with disabilities and young adults to vocational rehabilitation in Virginia. I'm the Director of Transition Services for DARS, and Matt Luther is a pre-employment transition services counselor. We have a number of vocational rehabilitation counselors who serve 132 different school divisions, and they specialize in vocational rehabilitation and helping prepare students and youth to be ready for higher education and careers. We have pre-employment transition services counselors. There are 9 current positions, and we're filling one in the near future, and they will offer services to any student with a disability as young as 14 up through the 21st birthday to help them explore and look at their interests and skills that would be needed to be successful. At any point in the process, a potentially eligible student with a disability can apply to become a DRS client and have more intensive services. All services that we provide are not pre-employment transition services, so if someone needs a vocational rehab service, they would need to apply and be determined eligible. We receive referrals from many different sources. Typically, if we're working with a student in a school, they can be referred often by their teacher or the transition specialist, an assistant principal. We can also get referrals from a family member or a community service provider, such as the Community Services Board or an ESO if they become familiar with someone. Once they are referred, then we will contact the student and their family to set up a meeting. And if the student is under age 18, then consent would need to be given by their parent or guardian. When we have an intake meeting, the pre-eds counselor or the VR counselor will complete an application. That's all the paperwork that needs to be done. They will also help the student and their family learn about their disability and how it may impact their ability to work. During that application and intake process, the VR counselor or the pre-eds counselor will gain lots of information to see if the student is eligible for either pre-eds or VR services. To be eligible for VR services, a person would have to have a disability, either physical, mental, or emotional, that would preclude them from getting or keeping a job. The counselor would need to feel that VR services would be necessary to reach an employment outcome. They must be in the United States legally and be eligible to work. They must reside in Virginia. And finally, persons receiving SSI or SSDI are presumed eligible for our services because, of course, you have to have a disability in order to get one of those benefits. We will gather documents that we need to determine whether someone has a disability, and we generally do that through the schools. They can provide us the documentation that we need, or if we need to go outside the school for records, we will do that. It might be through a medical doctor or someone who is treating the person. It could be through a hospital, but it's important that we gather documents to determine whether or not they have a disability. Order of selection and priority categories. Order of selection is required by VR agencies across the country when we don't have enough money to serve all the people who are eligible for services. When that happens, we are required to serve folks with the most significant disabilities first. And Virginia is currently in an order of selection. At this point, all categories are open. But there are times when we need to shut down categories, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, when we don't have sufficient funds. There are 3 priority categories, and priority 1 is people with the most significant disabilities. They would need to have 3 or more functional limitations, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, that would determine them to be most significantly disabled. Priority 2 would be an individual who has a significant disability that would result in 1 or 2 functional limitations, and they would also need substantial VR services for at least 6 months. And priority 3 would be all other people with disabilities who are determined eligible for voc rehab services. And there are 7 functional limitations, and they're listed here, that help us determine eligibility in the appropriate category. They are mobility, communication, work tolerance, interpersonal skills, work skills, self-direction, and self-care. And now I'm going to give you a little bit of a definition of each one of those. Mobility, to have a serious functional limitation in mobility, someone would need to have a physical, cognitive, or psychological disability to move from place to place inside and outside the home. And examples of this could be someone has the inability to get around in their community, home, or workplace without assistance from others due to a disability. They would have failed attempts to prepare for or get their driver's license without special adaptations or accommodations or special training, requires specialized transportation due to a disability. I think of a person who may need to have a job coach or have a counselor teach them how to navigate the bus system, as that person may have a serious limitation in mobility, which fits in the next one, being unable to learn or access public transportation needed for employment. And they could be dependent on adaptive equipment due to a disability. And the next one is interpersonal skills. Would be significant social withdrawal due to a disability that has resulted in the inability to prepare for or succeed in work. Significantly poor relationships, inappropriate behaviors, or frequent conflicts with peers, coworkers, supervisors that would lead to an inability to be successful in work. It could be they don't understand acceptable levels and types of interaction appropriate to work behavior, or it could be a disability-related personal behavior that has led to frequent legal problems, or it could be a deformity, disfigurement, disability-related behavior that causes others to avoid them. Three is communication. And a serious functional limitation in communication could be a severely impaired expressive or receptive communication, either oral or written, due to a disability. An example could be that someone would need additional time or other accommodations to organize their thoughts or communications. It could be a serious difficult conversing with speech, reading, sign language, or other visual cues due to a disability. Someone who is deaf that is fluent in sign language may not have a serious functional limitation in communication, but it would cause them great difficulty out in the world of work and in their community, communicating with folks who don't use sign language. It could be also that the person would be dependent upon adaptive technology to communicate effectively, or difficulty engaging in telephone conversations, even with amplification, or they could not be readily understood by others on first contact due to a disability. Self-direction is next. And self-direction means the ability to plan, initiate, problem solve, organize, or independently carry out goal-directed activities. And indicators of a serious functional limitation in this area would mean that someone would require supervision on a constant basis due to a disability, or that they require supervision to begin and finish tasks, or supervision to monitor their own behavior or make decisions. It could also be a serious difficulty working independently, or shifting focus from one activity or task to the next without prompting, or difficulty adjusting to new situation or changes in the daily routine, or they might be easily distracted with a short attention span, leading to repeatedly poor task completion. Or they may have impatient or impulsive behaviors leading to repeatedly poor task completion, or they may be unaware of negative consequences of decisions that result in poor task completion or job loss. Work skills is next. Someone with a serious functional limitation in work skills would need significantly more support or supervision to learn and perform job than normally required of persons without disabilities who are of an equivalent age. Or it could be that they cannot learn work skills without rehab technology or accommodations or modifications. They might exhibit poor work habits resulting in a history of job loss, such as poor attendance or timeliness, and work tolerance. It could be that the person doesn't have the capacity or endurance to perform the job duties without modification or adaptive technology. It could be that they can't perform at a consistent pace as required to meet production or quality standards. They may need frequent breaks more than the norm to organize themselves and to gather their thoughts and to or it could be that due to a disability, they can't tolerate sitting or standing for long periods of time that may be required by the job. And finally, self-care. The person with a serious functional limitation in this area would not be able to perform personal hygiene functions without assistance. They may need reinforcement or reminders to maintain personal hygiene. They can't dress without assistance, can't feed themselves without assistance. They can't comply with their treatment or their medication regimen without assistance. They can't handle money or budgeting without assistance. They require attendant care or assistive technology, and they can't live independently without supports due to a disability. I'd like to thank you for listening, and now I'm going to hand it over to Matt Luther.
Hi, I'm Matt Luther. I am a pre-ed counselor on the Virginia Peninsula, and I used to be a transition counselor. And I'm following Jean to discuss with you how Virginia is meeting the requirements of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, formerly known as WIOA, and also to tell you a little bit about pre-ed's services, which is pre-employment transition services. Now in Virginia, it's important to realize that with WIOA, we didn't get any additional funds, and we've been asked to use 15% of our overall budget to spend on pre-employment transition services. And this is definitely a paradigm shift for Virginia and other states who provide vocational rehabilitation services. So pre-employment transition services, we have pre-employment transition counselors assigned to each of there are 7 districts, which is in the Commonwealth, it's geographically divided up in 7 districts. We can provide services to students age 14 and up. They do not have to be eligible for DARS services, but the key term here is potentially eligible. Referrals can come from a variety of places, and consent must be provided for anyone under the age of 18. As a pre-ed counselor, I think of myself as a JV coach and a transition counselor as a varsity coach. So when someone is done working with me, they would be moved up to the varsity coach or the transition counselor. But we're all on the same team, and the services would continue to flow. Pre-employment transition services are the first step of a continuum of transition services that DRS can provide. To receive these services, a student has to be potentially eligible. Then the student must have a disability, and there has to be verification of that disability or a documented disability. It's important to realize that referrals can come from public schools, private schools, parents, homeschooled, juvenile detention centers, hospitals, mental health specialists. And as a pre-ed counselor, we cannot take a student past the application process in the vocational rehabilitation process. To receive DRS pre-ET services, a student could have an IEP, a 504 plan, or the student could just have a documented disability not served by the school. In Virginia, a student with a disability is ages 14 to 22, or until they receive a standard or advanced diploma. A youth with a disability is a term that WIOA has put out, and that is ages 14 to 24. So all students with disability are youth with disabilities, but not all youth with disabilities are students with disabilities. If that can be any more clear, let me know. So now I'm going to talk to you about the actual 5 core pre-ET services or activities. And it's important that you realize that with WIOA, we are trying to collaborate with other agencies, in this case specifically school personnel, but it doesn't always have to mean it has to be school personnel. The first service, the first core service, is job exploration counseling, which is, to me, it's what are your vocational interests? And there are some examples of how you can clarify someone's vocational interests or try to help them get a better idea of what are their vocational interests. In Virginia, we have a transition indicator, indicator 13. All school systems must report 21 state performance indicators to the Virginia Department of Education. But indicator 13 particularly talks about age-appropriate informal transition assessment, where we clarify or try to clarify a student's interests, strengths, and preferences. But I want to caution people that as a transition assessment, when you're developing a person's individualized education plan in the school system, that it should also include independent living skills, community resources, and post-secondary education. The second pre-ETS activity or service is work-based learning experiences. So you have determined what are your interests. Now, how can we get more information about that particular career interest? Through paid or unpaid work experiences, apprenticeship, internships, volunteering, but it's really a hands-on approach to further career exploration. The third pre-ETS activity is counseling on opportunities for enrollment in post-secondary education. So we've tried to clarify your interest. We've tried to do more hands-on further career exploration. Now, where can you get the training? Training could be at a college, community college, a workforce development program, a vocational training program. It has to do with financial aid, FAFSA, and learning how to get a FAFSA ID. The next area of pre-ETS activity is workplace readiness skills. So I look at what skills does someone currently have. Some examples listed are training in soft skills, customer service, peer mentoring. Could also be job seeking skills, job clubs. And one of the things I wanted to point out in this area is sometimes some of these services can overlap. For example, we have a program in Virginia called PERT, or Postsecondary Education, Rehabilitation, and Transition, where students go to the Wilson Workforce Center in Fishersville, Virginia. It's a comprehensive rehab center, and it assesses an individual's career interests, preferences, strengths, as well as their independent living skills and leisure skills. So a student, if selected by their local school division in their transition pre-ETS team, they could go there for 5 to 9 days. And some people might think that that could also be job exploration counseling. So it's important to understand that some of these services could overlap in some areas. The last pre-ETS activity is instruction in self-advocacy. And obviously, can someone talk about their strengths and their disability positively? Can they also talk about their learning needs or accommodations in a positive way? For example, hi, my name is Matt. I'm good at communicating with people, and I learn best by following a demonstration. The next slide is an example of how the Commonwealth of Virginia is broken up into 7 districts geographically. Gina mentioned that there are 9 pre-ETS counselors. Well, there is one more position we are filling. 2 of the goals of working in the pre-ETS area for the Division of Rehabilitative Services are that we increase the number of students with disabilities that we serve, and we're trying to increase the positive outcomes of people employed in competitive and integrated employment. It's important to know that transition counselors may also provide pre-ed services. Pre-ed services aren't just delegated to pre-ed counselors, and that the Virginia Division of Rehabilitative Services is continually looking at creative ways to implement these services. We've had discussions about possibly contracting with employment service organizations. And the last slide will tell you how to link students to vocational rehabilitative services in Virginia and Jean's contact information. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the web board. Jean and I both thank you for taking the time to listen to our presentation.